Dim the lights and let the world fall away. You're entering DreadLoop, Creepypasta, where the silence feels heavier, and every story pulls you deeper into the dark. If you enjoy these dark stories, subscribe, and return when the night feels longest. Now settle and breathe slowly, and listen closely. Tonight's tale begins now. I want to be honest with you before I start, because the story doesn't make sense unless you understand the kind of person I was when I took the job. I was 31. I had been laid off from a title company in Des Moines where I'd spent 6 years filing property transfers, and the severance had run out in April. My girlfriend at the time had left me in February, which is not something I'm going to dwell on, except to say that when she left, she took the cat, and the cat was the thing I missed most. That tells you something about the relationship. By the end of May, I was living in a studio apartment where the refrigerator made a sound like a man clearing his throat every 40 minutes, and I had started measuring my days by how many of those throat clears I heard between waking up and falling asleep. It was usually around 18 throat clears per day is what my life had become. So when my aunt called me in early June and asked if I'd be willing to manage a motel for the summer while she recovered from a hip replacement, I said yes before she finished the sentence. The motel was in northern Minnesota, about 4 hours above Duluth, on a 2-lane highway that ran along the edge of a chain of lakes nobody had ever heard of. My aunt had owned the place for 22 years. It was called the Lakeview, though you could only see the lake from the back windows of the office if you stood on your toes. She told me something on that first phone call that I didn't think about again until much later. She said the last person who helped me out there was a kid named Andrew, the son of a friend of mine. He did 2 weeks in 2011. He left early. She said it the way you'd mention a detail you didn't want emphasized, and I let it pass because I was thinking about the money. I drove up on a Thursday. The drive was long in the way that drives are long when you have nothing to think about except the fact that you're driving. I stopped in Duluth for gas and a sandwich, and then the road got narrower and the trees got taller, and by the time I pulled into the Lakeview's gravel lot, the sun was going down behind a line of pines that looked, from where I was sitting, like a black wall with the light on the other side of it. The motel was 1 story, 8 rooms, painted the color of old butter. There was a small office at the near end with a bell on the door and a hand-lettered sign that said office. My aunt was waiting for me on the porch in a folding chair, her cane across her knees. She looked older than I remembered, which was its own small grief. She hugged me from the chair and told me to bring my bag inside, and she'd make coffee. As I walked past the length of the motel toward the office, I noticed something small. The curtains in every room were drawn, which made sense because the rooms were empty. But the curtains in the last room, room 8, weren't just drawn, they were pinned. Someone had used clothespins along the inside edge of the window to hold the fabric flat against the glass, so that not even a sliver of the inside was visible. I noticed it and I forgot it, the way you notice a crooked picture on a wall in a stranger's house and then don't think about it again. We sat at the kitchen table in the apartment behind the office, and she walked me through the job. It was a simple job. There were 22 rooms worth of towels and sheets in the storage closet. Check-in was 2 in the afternoon. Checkout was 11, though in practice nobody ever showed up before 4 and nobody ever left before 10. The rates were on a laminated card by the register. The credit card machine sometimes needed to be restarted. The ice machine in the breezeway was temperamental, and if it started making the grinding sound, I was to unplug it and wait an hour. Most nights I'd have 2 or 3 rooms rented. Some nights none. Then she told me the routine. At 10 every night I was to do a walk. Open each unrented door, flip the light on, look inside, flip it off, lock up, move on. She said nobody was ever any trouble. Then she said, "There are a few house rules I want you to follow. Small things. Just do them the way I say, and you won't have any trouble. She wrote them on a piece of yellow, legal paper in the looping cursive of a woman who had taken penmanship seriously as a child. There were 5.1. Always leave the vacancy sign on, even when the motel is full. Never turn it off. 2. If the phone in the office rings and the caller ID says unknown, let it go to the answering machine and erase the message without listening to it. 3. The room at the end, room 8, is not to be rented. Tell any guest who asks that it's being renovated. If you hear movement inside room 8 during your walk, do not stop, do not look at the door, and do not mention it in the logbook. 4. The ice machine makes noises sometimes. If it makes a noise that sounds like a voice, unplug it, and don't plug it back in until morning. If the voice says your name, leave the breezeway immediately and don't go back out there until after sunrise. 5. After the 10 o'clock walk, lock the office door and do not open it again for anyone until 6 in the morning. Not for guests, not for police, not for anyone. If there's an emergency, there's a phone outside the office that connects to the county sheriff. Point at the phone. Don't unlock the door. I read the list twice. I was waiting for her to explain. She didn't. She folded the paper and slid it across the table and said, "Put it somewhere you'll see it." I put it in my wallet. I said, "What happens if I break one?" She looked at me in a way I remember clearly. Not frightened, not warning, just tired. Like someone who had answered the same question a lot of times and had stopped trying to make the answer sound interesting. She said, "Nothing much happens. Not at first. You just start to notice things, and then you notice more things. And after a while you understand the rules were the easier version, and the harder version is what you're living in." Then she said, "I've followed them for 22 years. So has your uncle. Before he passed, the motel runs fine. The guests are happy. The rules are small. Just follow them." She left the next morning. I walked her to her daughter's car, and she hugged me again, and she said, "Call me if you need to. Anytime, any hour." And then she was gone, and I was alone at the Lakeview with a ring of keys and a folded piece of yellow paper in my wallet. The first night, I did my walk at 10, rooms 1 through 7. I skipped 8. But as I passed room 8, I heard something I made myself not hear. A single soft sound, like a floorboard settling under weight. One sound. Then nothing. I walked on at a normal pace, and I did not look at the door, and I did not write it in the log. Rule 3, I wrote nothing in the logbook and locked the office at 10:15. I sat in the apartment, and I ate a sandwich I didn't taste. The second night I noticed that the logbook was open on the counter when I came back from the walk. I had closed it. I was sure I had closed it. I had developed that habit on the first day, and I was not a sloppy person about habits. The book was open to a page from 2003. The entry said, 11:02 p.m., room 8, nothing. I stared at it for a long time. Room 8 was not supposed to be in the logbook. That was what Rule 3 meant. I flipped forward and back. There were no other entries for room 8 anywhere in the book. Just this one, written in my aunt's younger handwriting, 21. Years ago, I closed the book. I wrote the night's entry. I locked up. On the third night, the book was open again when I came back. Same page, same entry. 11:02 p.m., room 8. Nothing. The fourth night, I left a piece of paper on top of the book before my walk. When I came back, the paper was on the floor, and the book was open to the same page. I stopped leaving things on top of it. I called my aunt after the first week. I sighed yes. She said, "Then it's fine. It's just the motel saying hello to you." I laughed a little. I said, "What does that mean?" She said, "It means you've been there long enough that it's noticed you. Don't worry about it. Just keep following the rules." Then she changed the subject. She asked about the weather. She asked about the ice machine. We talked for 15 minutes about practical things, and she didn't return to the subject of the motel saying hello to me, and I let it go. I thought about that phrase for the rest of the day. The motel saying hello. The second week I had a few guests, a retired couple from Michigan and a Winnebago, a fisherman with a beard, a woman driving alone from Winnipeg who paid cash and was gone before sunrise. For them, the Lakeview was what it looked like from the road, which was a small family-owned place in the woods, clean sheets, a working remote control. They came and went in a single night, and they never felt anything. It was the smell of lake water, not lake water in a glass. Lake water the way it smells when you're standing on a dock at the end of summer. And the algae has started to turn. Room 4 was empty. The bed was made, the window was closed, the bathroom was dry. The smell lasted about 3 seconds, and then it was gone. I wrote nothing in the logbook. When I passed room 8 on the way back, the air in front of the door was cold. Noticeably cold. It was still there. I had 2 guests, a middle-aged. I was in the office reading. The ice machine lived in the breezeway between rooms 4 and 5, and it hummed steadily enough that you stopped noticing the hum after the first few days. But if it stopped, you noticed immediately because the silence where the hum had been was a different silence than the silence of the rest of the motel. The hum stopped. I set my book down. I put my hand on the front panel. It was vibrating. Then the whine shaped itself into something else. It wasn't a voice exactly. It was the shape of a voice. The rhythm of speech. Up, down, a pause, up again. Like hearing someone talking in the next room through a closed door, where you can't make out the words but you can hear the cadence. Like a question, I pulled the plug out of the wall so fast I took a chip of paint off the outlet. Machine went silent. I walked back to the office without running, because I had the feeling that if I ran, something would notice that I had run. I locked the office door. Rule said to leave the breezeway immediately or just to unplug the machine. Rule 4. If the voice says your name, leave the breezeway immediately and don't go back out there until after sunrise. I had left, but I had stood in front of the machine for 10 seconds while it shaped itself. I had waited to be sure. Whether the rules counted the intent or the result, I did not do the walk that night. In the morning, I went out to the breezeway. The plug was on the floor where I'd left it. The machine was off. But when I passed room 4 on the way back, I could hear humming through the wall. It was not the machine. The machine was unplugged. The humming was coming from inside room 4, or from inside the wall, or from somewhere I couldn't locate. I stood there for about 30 seconds. Then I went back to the office and I called my aunt. I told her about the smell and the cold pocket and the ice machine. I did not mention that it had said my name because I didn't want to hear what she would say. She listened without interrupting. Then, she said, you did the right thing. She bought the land in the 40s and built the motel, and she figured out the rules by paying attention to what worked. The rules are what's left over after 70 years of paying attention. That's all I can tell you. I said, what's in room 8? She said, I don't know. My mother told me not to look when I was 18, and she handed me the keys, and I listened to her, and I have never looked. And your uncle never looked, and the room has stayed closed, and that is why the motel has been a good place for 36 years of my family's life. I said, what about Andrew? The kid from 2011. Why did he leave early? She was quiet for a while. Then she said, Andrew opened room 8. He didn't go inside. He just opened the door and looked. He was 18 and curious. He drove away the next morning, and he wouldn't. And 3 years later, he drove his car into a lake. She said, I'm telling you this because I want you to understand. The rules are not suggestions. I am asking you not to open room 8. I said, I won't. She said, I love you. I followed the rules exactly. The logbook opened itself whenever I left the office. I stopped trying to keep it shut. The cold pocket outside room 8 was there on some nights and gone on others. The ice machine hummed normally during that time, or at least it didn't do anything strange I could remember. I started keeping the TV on in the apartment all night, at low volume for the human voices. I started sleeping with a light on. Guests came and went. A family of 4 on the way to International Falls. 2 brothers on a fishing trip. Nobody noticed anything. They checked out in the morning and thanked me for a quiet night. The last strange thing happened on a Tuesday in August, about 3 weeks before my aunt was scheduled to come back. I was in the office. It was about 9:45. I had one guest, an older man in room 2. He'd checked in earlier that afternoon, paid cash, barely spoken. He'd said he was driving up to a cabin on one of the lakes and needed a place to sleep. I'd given him the key, and he'd gone to his room, and I hadn't seen him since the phone rang. The caller ID said unknown. I let it ring 4 times. The machine picked up. My aunt's outgoing message played. The beep, a voice said, "Excuse me. I think I locked myself out of my room." It was a man's voice, polite, tired sounding, middle-aged. It sounded completely ordinary. My first instinct was to pick up. That's the job. I was already reaching, then I stopped. Because I was thinking, which guest? I only had one. The man in room 2. And his voice, the little I'd heard of it, had not sounded like this. His voice had been deeper and slower and little rough. Also, if he was locked out, he wouldn't be calling the office phone. He'd be standing 10 feet away, knocking on the office door. I remembered the rule. Erase the message without listening. I had already listened. The voice on the machine said, "Hello? Are you there?" I did not move. It said, "I can see you're there. The light is on." The office curtains were drawn. They had been drawn all summer. Nobody could see in. The voice said, "Please. It's getting cold out here." It was August. It was warm. I looked at the clock on the wall. It said 9:48. I had 27 minutes until 10:15 when I was supposed to lock the office. But the office door was already locked. I had locked it at 9, paranoid, too early. And I had not unlocked it since. The voice said, "Hello? I can hear you breathing." I was barely breathing. The voice said, "Will you come to the door, please?" Then the machine clicked off. The red light blinked. I stood behind the counter for a long time. Then I walked over and pressed delete without playing the message back, and the light stopped blinking. At 10:02, I heard footsteps on the porch. They were slow, unhurried, a man's footsteps. They came from the direction of the parking lot, walked up the 3 wooden steps to the porch, crossed the porch, and stopped in front of the office door. Then there was a knock. 3 soft knocks. I did not speak. I did not move. The knock came again. Then the voice, the same voice from the phone, said very quietly through the door, "I know you're in there." Then silence. Then, after about a minute, the voice said something else, softer, almost kind. It said, "Andrew, open the door." I don't know how long I stood there after that. My legs stopped feeling like mine. I could hear my own pulse in the room with me, loud enough that I worried it was loud enough to hear. From the porch. Eventually, the footsteps retreated. Across the porch, down the 3 wooden steps, across the gravel, away. I sat in the dark office until 6:01 a.m., which was 1 minute past when the 5th rule expired. Then I stood up, and my legs almost didn't hold me, and I unlocked the office door and stepped out onto the porch. There was nothing there. The old man in room 2 was still in his room. His car was still in the lot. Everything looked exactly the way it had looked the evening before. I did the walk at 6:30. Rooms 1, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I walked past room 8 without looking at it, but as I passed, I saw something I couldn't unsee. The clothespins that had been holding the curtains flat against the glass were on the ground outside the window. All of them. In a small pile on the gravel. And through the gap where the curtains had shifted, just an inch, I could see a thin strip of the inside of the room. I did not look closely. I kept walking. The room was dark, and the light was wrong, and something was standing near the far wall. Not moving, just standing. Tall enough that its shape reached from the floor to just below the ceiling. It didn't have a face that I could make out in the gap I had. It didn't need one. I walked to the office at a normal speed. I went inside. I locked the door. I called my aunt. She listened without interrupting. When I was done, she said, "Honey, come home today. I'll call Delphine." Delphine was my aunt's friend. Older than my aunt, white hair cut very short, denim jacket. The eyes of a woman who had seen more than she was going to tell me. She arrived at 2 in the afternoon. "I made it." She said, "You look like hell." I said, "I feel like hell." She said, "Go, drive home. I'll take it from here." I was already packed. I'd packed while I was waiting for her. 20 minutes later, I was standing in the office with my bag at my feet, holding the master key. I said, "The clothespins," she said, "I'll put them back." I said, "There's something in there." She said, "I know." I said, "Have you seen it?" She looked at me. She had kind eyes, but they were the eyes of someone who had answered this question before. She said, "I have not. And I am never going to. And I hope you are never going to. Your aunt's grandmother made the rules, and they have worked for 70 years. That's what I know. The rules work. Go home, honey. Don't come back." I drove away that afternoon. I drove 4 hours to Duluth. I stopped at a diner off the highway, and I ate an entire meal without looking up from my plate. I drove the rest of the way home through the dark, and I got back to Des Moines at 2 in the morning, and my apartment was exactly the way I had left it, and the refrigerator cleared its throat while I was carrying my bag through the door. That was 3 years ago. I still think about the motel. I don't think about room 8, and I don't think about the voice on the phone. Not often. Those aren't the things that follow me. What follows me is the 5th rule. "There used to be a 6th rule," she said. Her mother had written it on the original list, the one in her grandmother's hand. But her mother had decided, at some point, that the 6th rule didn't make any sense, and she had stopped including it when she rewrote the list for my aunt. My aunt had kept that version, and it had worked for 22 years. I asked her what the original 6th rule said. She said, "It said, once a week, on a night you don't choose, leave the office door unlocked from 10:15 to midnight. Do not be in the office during that time." I said, "What does that mean?" She said, "I don't know." My mother never did it, and nothing bad happened, and she thought her mother had been superstitious. She took it off the list. I said, "The motel has been fine, hasn't it?" She said it has. "Want to talk about it, honey? I'm glad you're home. Don't ask me any more about the motel. So I didn't. But I think about it. I think about whether there was something the motel was supposed to get on a night it chose for an hour and 45 minutes, unlocked and unobserved. I think about whether that thing has been waiting for 70 years, patient, not angry, just waiting, the way a cat waits by a door that was promised to be opened. I think about the voice on the phone and how it knew about Andrew, and how Andrew drove his car into a lake. I think about the standing shape in the room, tall enough to almost touch the ceiling, and I wonder if it was the thing that was supposed to be let out once a week, or whether it was something that had moved in because the thing that was supposed to be let out had given up and gone dormant. I think about whether all the other rules, the 5 remaining rules, are a substitute for the one that was lost. Whether the locked door and the vacancy sign and the unplugged ice machine and the deleted messages are the motel's way of managing something that was supposed to be fed once a week and hasn't been fed in 70 years. I hope my aunt lives a long time. Someone has to keep running the motel, and keep following the rules, and keep the sign on, and keep the door locked. I don't want to be the one who has to do it next. And sometimes late at night, when my refrigerator clears its throat in the dark, I find myself listening to it. Not the way you listen to a broken appliance, the way you listen to a voice. Waiting to see if the rhythm shapes itself into something. Waiting to see if it says my name. It hasn't, yet I don't know what I'll do if it does.